Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. I'm slowing down to make sure I get it right. Okay. All is well so far. And, no more snow excuse here in Loudoun County, although I did note that some of the other neighboring counties took the day off again for snow. I guess they got it a little worse than we did. So good luck to them. We have more snow coming, by the way, tomorrow night. So I guess it could take out school on Friday. So I was scrambling for ways to think of a way. I actually entertained the thought of calling in and saying my son was sick tomorrow and the next day, and then maybe see if the snow takes care of Friday and get a pass for the first week of Omicron being in circulation in large numbers probably in the schools, but we'll just have to risk it. So KN95 and a spare in the backpack, and off he goes, and fingers crossed. So far, so good in terms of the reports from around the country for vaccinated folks. They're getting it and they don't even notice it in many cases. And look, I hope we don't get it at all, but best you can do. So best defense, still a vaccine. And, as Greg usually says.
Oh my God, get the vaccine already, you fucks.
Yeah, exactly. So if you haven't done that, you can get it already and catch up with things. All right, let's see. Other things in the news today. I have to note for the record, the former guy has canceled what was formerly a scheduled press conference for January 6th. And he's actually, he stubbornly says, well, I'll tell you this. I'm going to give you the same speech later on. Instead of doing it January 6th from Pervalago, a.k.a. the site of Ghislaine Maxwell's sex crimes, and the sex crimes of many others that she enabled, of course. We shouldn't leave them out of the picture, but okay, you get the idea. He's instead going to deliver them at a rally in Arizona on the 15th, which is better. I mean, it takes all the power out of the date, and that's a good thing. I don't know whether that changes anybody else's, illegal or nefarious plans for January 6th, but I think that's a good thing. I would say from a PR perspective for him, probably moving the speech from Pervalago to elsewhere is probably a good idea too. Again, I think we should all be talking about the fact that that's where all of the not all, but a good deal of, and some of the worst, of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's trolling took place. By which I mean not trolling to annoy people, but like trolling for fish, of course. So picking up the 14 and 15-year-old girls who were, for some reason available in large numbers working on the pool deck at Mar-a-Lago. I don't know how that happened or who facilitated that, but I think he might be a giant orange basketball-looking guy wandering around saying he's the president. So, okay. Many of you who may have read this morning's post at Daily Kos know that Greg Dworkin is supposed to be otherwise engaged today. However, we've arranged for a mystery guest in his place, or there's a mystery guest situation happening at any rate. But you'll never believe what the mystery is. The mystery is it's Greg. And the real mystery is what happened to... We're excited about that, but it's a letdown as a mystery goes. The real mystery is what happened to the plumber. So, okay, we'll find out about that later on. There was supposed to be some plumbing work going on today, but instead there's some Skype calling, and we're happy about that. I couldn't sustain the mystery and the surprise for more than 30 seconds, Greg. We're excited to have you here today. It's facing the prospect of, one, the show by myself, and two, my son out there among the Omicron particles floating around, and no doctor to talk to reassure me that the KN95 mask and the vaccine would do the trick in terms of keeping him out of the hospital and keeping us away from serious illness. So
that it will.
Thank you. Glad you're here.
Yeah, and so everybody up there mask game, which is good.
Yeah.
And so I sort of had a plumbing issue.
It happens.
But, because it's the year of the plague,
Yes.
If there's one plague, there's another plague. So we also had an ice storm.
Oh,
And so there's lots
Good
of
for you.
spin-outs, sort of like
I see.
Northern Virginia style, but no snow.
yeah.
And lots of the sections of the highway are shut down, this, that, and everything else. The bottom line there is that
did
means
get
the
like
plumber's
this.
delayed.
Okay.
So if the plumber's delayed, I have time to do the show.
I guess that's good. And the plumbing will get done later. Be careful, plumber. Don't
Right.
risk
Tis an ill
anything.
plague that blows nobody any good.
It certainly does blow. I know that. All right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that as January 6th
Isn't it?
comes, and of course that anniversary is tomorrow, there's been for about 2 or 3 weeks a flurry of interest all of a sudden in this, and lots of interesting commentary from the media, including the folks who were there, some of them having flashbacks, some of them
Okay.
pointing out how difficult it is to cover something that's terrible, but it's terrible every day, and so it's the same old terrible every day. Why is it news? And, as somebody else pointed out, look, if cannibals eat children on day 1 and day 2 and day 3, it's still news on day 4.
Right. That's a big headline, quite honestly. So, yeah, all right. Well, look, the day itself is coming, and no harm in at least, certainly no harm in pointing out, hey, this horrible illegal thing happened, and the people who were responsible for it should be held accountable.
Well, that's certainly happening this week. Again, always the question is what's sustained. But the fact that the January 6th committee is doing its thing, doing the politically adept leaking of certain information, such as, by the way, Sean Hannity, we have all your text to Mark Meadows. You want to talk to us, please?
Yeah. Hannity, big in the news yesterday.
Yeah, and that sort of thing. And, the Hannity-Trump connection is important. The Fox-Trump connection is important because that, according to other sources, is part of the reason why the terrible idea of a January 6th speech from Mar-a-Lago was canceled and moved to Arizona. I mean, firstly, they probably appealed to Trump's, look, you can do it in front of a bigger audience.
Yeah.
But Laura Ingraham wrote him and said, according to sources, this was really a terrible idea. Don't do this. And she and Sean Hannity were among the many people who were in contact, Sean Hannity being his virtual chief of staff, were writing him in regard to what was going on in January 6th real time. So all of that is, important in terms of how it breaks down.
All right. Yeah. Well, it may very well be that the people at Fox were hoping to either delay that, or maybe he'll forget between the 6th
They
and
probably
15th.
told him, look, it's a great idea. Everything you do is wonderful, but we're going to have a hell of a time covering this given the anniversary. So please don't do this to us.
Yeah. And,
Because
so unknown why
we
he
want to
decided
cover you, and it's not us, it's you. So don't do it. Don't do this to us so that we don't have to do this to you.
Oh, okay. Look what you made me do. It's
Well, that's the
abusers
only
all
kind of
way
argument
around.
that works with him.
Yeah. All right. Well, whatever it is, there's also the chance he might forget entirely. Someone will fly him there or whatever. But he might forget, lose his way, forget about commemorating the 6th. Hey, who knows? He may fall ill between now and then. It could happen.
So I subscribe to a lot of different things, as we've discussed on the show. So many I don't even remember what I subscribe to anymore.
Oh, that's
And I'm always startled when I try
I
to read an
think.
article and find out, I can.
Some of them may be free. Do you know that?
Yes,
Okay.
and in fact, Margaret Sullivan from the Washington Post had a lovely piece the other day about how things have to change with journalism, and one of the things that should change
Yes.
is just like with COVID, you ought to make January 6 articles in front of the paywall. I think we mentioned
yes.
that on Monday.
You did.
And
Yeah,
so
that's a good idea.
we have another newsletter I subscribe to called the Editorial Board. It's curated by John Storr,
Yes,
but
I've
there's a
seen
whole
that.
lot of really
Right.
interesting people that write there.
Yeah, I think we visited a couple times.
Yes, and if you don't subscribe, you can take a peek at an article, limited view. That is to say, you can look at a few before they say, okay, you really should subscribe. And on January 4th, John Storr interviewed a long-time newspaperman by the name of Mark Jacob, 41 years in daily newspapers, mostly in Chicago, former Sunday editor at the Chicago Sun-Times, former Metro editor at the Chicago Tribune, And since retiring, he's reinvented himself, the piece says, as the sharpest press critic on social media. If anybody knows how journalism should be done, it's Mark. So,
all right.
I began by asking if the press corps had learned anything.
Okay. Anybody?
And he said, well, they're learning slowly, too slowly. You see more instances of people saying flat out that the Republican Party is an anti-democratic movement, which has been obvious for years. Of course, it's wrong to paint the Washington press corps with one brush, because some have been far better than others. You know, Dan Frumkin, for example.
Okay. Sure. Generous.
Yeah. Reporting both sides, the Times editorial board likened the GOP to authoritarian movements the world over. Is that the progress you mean? That the New York Times would say the GOP is an authoritarian movement? And Mark Jacobs said, well, that's a good example, but remember the Times was afraid to call Donald Trump a liar in 2015. There's no question that timidity and lack of truth-telling by major news outlets is partly responsible for the perilous state we're in. I think many Washington journalists became very comfortable with the stenographic school of journalism. Doesn't that sound familiar? Didn't we talk about that? Blogging World, 2003-ish?
Yeah.
With people who covered George W. Bush, stop being a stenographer. Well, I'm doing it fairly because he said that, and I accurately told you what he said. Well, that's not good enough when they're lying to you. And if they quoted the Democrats and Republicans, Mark Jacobs said, in equal numbers and acted like their comments were equally valid, they could stake out a comfortable position as objective, and the small talk of the cocktail parties would remain congenial.
Yes, okay. That's
so John Storr said, in other words, you're reporting both sides of cancer.
Huh.
Yeah, melanoma might have a point there. Even when the D.C. news media was fact-checking Republican lies, it would do it in a tidy and ineffective manner. Often news stories would say what Trump said, then say what the truth was, and by then it's too late. You could call it objective, said John Storr. You could call it irresponsible. Can you explain to non-news people like us why it's irresponsible? Well, Mark says, first, I think the news media has been misled in a quest for some mythical version of objectivity. Sounds like Jay Rosen here.
Yeah.
Deciding to conduct an interview or write a story is making a value judgment.
Okay.
For way too long, political journalists have thought objectivity meant letting both sides have their say, even when they knew one side was lying more than the other side.
All right, that's familiar.
They were being objective, but they weren't being fair. At least not fair to their customers.
That's a
who depended on them to sort out what was true.
Yeah, well.
So current political reporting, therefore, is a dereliction of duty. Editors and reporters should never let a lie get in the publication without it being aggressively called out as a lie. Great example of that, in a good way, last night, by the way, was Ari Melber interviewing Peter Navarro.
I saw it on your recommendation.
And he let Navarro talk and then said, but sir, you understand that what you're describing is a coup, and that a lot of the things that people are suggesting in terms of reforms are to stop people like you.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a really good interview.
It was. It kind of left him flat, Navarro. I mean, he said, I want a chance to respond. I didn't even...
Yeah. No. You talked all the time, Ari Melber said. This is a back and forth, to and fro, and therefore I let you talk. Now it's my turn. What the hell are you doing, and why do you think that this is acceptable?
Well,
that was a great interview.
Yes, I did. I saw some people were saying, well, as usual, don't let anybody like that have a platform. But if you're going to let them have a platform or lure them onto a platform where you flatten them like that, I say.
Right.
Forget it.
So a lot of current political reporting, Mark Jacobs says, is a dereliction of duty. Sad to say, a lot of American political journalism has been defensive, designed to prevent the editors and reporters from getting angry phone calls from one side or another. But, of course, we both know, if you don't get any angry phone calls, you're not doing your job.
Yeah, they always say that that's the case. So why are you so afraid of angry phone calls?
Everybody hates us, therefore we must be right.
Yeah.
Well, one side hates you because you covered it at all, and the other side hates you because you covered it wrong.
Yeah. Well, so you'll still get your angry phone calls. What's wrong with you? Okay. Well, look, if they need angry phone calls to feel like they're doing the right thing, I will call them and tell them I'm angry.
Right. Then he goes on to say, National Republicans are masters of the lie. I think a big mistake the news media have made is giving the American people too much credit. We learned this during the pandemic, by the way. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a sad fact. When the news media carefully avoided calling Trump a liar and laid out the facts, they were assuming, or at least hoping, that the public could weigh the evidence and figure out Trump was lying. But large segments of the public didn't reach that conclusion.
Yes.
Perhaps the most important lesson of the era is propaganda works. So when the right wing repeats a lie enough times, people believe it. We've said this many times.
Even if it's a lie,
Adults
I'll
learn
say
by
it.
repetition. Let me say that again. Adults learn by repetition. Most of the news media and the Democratic Party think that if they say something once or twice, everybody gets it, they can move on. That's obviously wrong. And that's the whole thing we talked about in terms of bad news. Well, we said it last week. Why you say we're not covering it? Because you're not covering it every frickin' day, every frickin' opportunity. That's why.
That's an unfortunate fact. That is very true. I feel the same way sometimes. I stop talking about things. Say I've said what I need to say about this, and I can point back to it. But that
obviously, gun violence doesn't matter because you really haven't covered
Yeah.
it the way you did right after Sandy Hook.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we all didn't cover it the same way last week that we did on Sandy Hook. There's a bunch of other stuff going on. It doesn't make it any less important.
Right. You'd be in trouble for not covering those things. But I get that point.
So John Storch says, well, one of the founding principles of the editorial board is that most people, most of the time, have something better to do than pay attention to politics.
Okay.
Or I would add process. We're different.
There's nothing better.
It's our responsibility to tell them what they need to know. That's why we have the show.
Oh, yes.
That requires,
Over and
even
over.
demands, that we be judicious.
To an extent, yes. I'm not great.
I'm not commenting on that one.
Yeah.
So Mark Jacobs said, well, I'm so glad you said that. I don't think everyone needs to be a political nerd to be a good American. There's an elitism in politics and media that tends to exclude people who are too busy registering their kids for soccer or arguing about whether schools should be open to find the time to read a Washington Post op-ed. But the real challenge for people who want to prevent a radical fascist minority from taking over the country is to get people who don't care about politics to realize they need to take action if they don't want to see their kids grow up in a dictatorship. So that's the challenge, and that's why I think it really needs to be front and center.
All right.
All the time.
Here it is.
So I thought that was a really excellent, insightful, from a newspaperman sort of thing. You can have a blogger say the same thing, but I think it carries more weight for somebody who's in the business talking about his peeps.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, well, you're just on the outside and can never get a job in journalism, therefore it's just sour grapes, we don't have to listen to you. And besides, and I can tell you this from personal experience, no matter what they tell you, reporters really, really, really resent bloggers because they feel like bloggers are giving the same thing away for free, and therefore it's diluting what they get paid.
Yeah.
I know that because they told me.
Yeah.
Nothing personal. You do great work, but I hate that you give it away for free.
Yeah, and it's difficult to have everything you do critiqued from an armchair. Whether it's tough. I'm wondering. Actually, it brings up the same question.
Well, the funny thing is, so many of the bloggers are actually subject matter experts in their own right in various and sundry areas.
Right, and they're still in armchairs. So it's an interesting thing. Like the pressure of producing news on deadline, or doing things live on television, or interviewing somebody on the spot live, and then hearing from people who thought of better responses later. I understand, and it's good, and I wish we all had these awesome answers at our fingertips. Some people are better than that than others, or you could be better prepared so that you might do it more often. But I imagine that must be frustrating to do a pretty good job. Say you take all these things into account, do the best you can to produce the news, and then somebody else says, well, if I were there, I would have said, something. And that's sometimes it's not presented all that gently, and it's hard to take. I can understand that. But of course, there's a bigger problem of we don't have to listen to you, or the correct way to do this is to present it as though there's no problem for anybody.
But the funny thing is, of course, reporters will tell you they have incredibly thick skin. Mm-hmm. They take crap all the time from flacks, from politicians, and just rolls off their back.
Right.
Let a citizen say, you really got this story wrong. Well, how dare you say such?
It does happen, yeah, and we all have those frailties, that's for sure. I'm wondering, what is his record? And 41 years in Chicago papers. Would he tell you that he suffered from the same malady while he was working and sort of discovered it in retirement, or was it something he had a record of exercising as a practice while he was actively in the business? Do you know?
I
don't know if he says that. Yeah, that would be my question to him, and then he would yell at me for being a blogger and ruining his his TED Talk or something, but I'd be interested to know. It wouldn't surprise me. There's a lot of things you see better from just a slight distance or with a little more time and less time pressure on your hands. It's okay. Just wondering.
Well, he's on Twitter. You can follow him and see what he has to say about sundry stuff. If he's a good critic, that would be certainly worthwhile doing.
Well, he's a good enough critic to listen to now, whether he did it when he was in the Chicago papers or not. No, also, of course, you have a boss hanging over your head who might say, if you want to do this personal TED Talk thing, go find another job or retire or whatever. But while you're here, I need you to write up this traffic ticket story from the mayor's office and have it to me on my desk by 9.
Right. Well, he's on as Mark Jacobs 16 on Twitter if you want to follow him.
We do.
Okay, in September 27th, 2021. Okay, so this is way before the anniversary and way before this interview, but, this year. I used to edit page one stories for the Chicago Tribune, including many from Washington. This comes from a tweet thread that he wrote.
Okay.
In this thread, I explained why the media, including me, have been unintentionally complicit in the rise of fascism that threatens our democracy. It doesn't completely answer your question, but sort of addresses it. Mainstream media have long tried to treat Republicans and Democrats equally. Some, like me, thought that was a way to be fair. In fact, it was a way to be lazy. Just to quote a Democrat and to quote a Republican, and you're done.
Yeah.
It's only 9 tweets, so it's not forever.
You're trying to get done with work and get home.
Right. When I edited political stories, I went so far as to count the quotes from Republicans and Democrats, thinking an equal number would make us fairer. I didn't think I was helping either party. I thought I was helping the readers. I was wrong.
All right, there we go.
If you look back 3 or 4 decades, you see many corrupt politicians in both parties. Abscam, Keating 5, that were mostly Democratic. That would make sense because at the time Democrats were in power. And those who were in power usually have the scandals. But in recent decades, it's obvious the GOP is more unethical and anti-democratic, which means treating the parties equally helps Republicans.
Okay.
Hillary Clinton mishandled emails. George W. Bush lied to get us into a war. Both were bad. One was way worse.
Yes.
Okay. And, if you have trouble figuring out which one was worse, somebody reminded me of Aaron Rodgers, quarterback who refuses to get vaccinated, who proudly pointed out that he has an Ayn Rand book on his bookshelf behind him, therefore, making him an intellectual.
Okay.
And John Rogers, author, said a while back, there's 2 novels that can change a bookish 14-year-old's life, The Lord of the Rings and Atlas Shrugged. One is a childish fantasy that often engenders a lifelong obsession with its unbelievable heroes, leading to an emotionally stunted, socially crippled adulthood, unable to deal with the real world, and the other involves orcs.
This does happen.
Right? So, the idea that you would look at, which is worse, because they must be equal. They both did bad things. Again, that's one of the reasons why we get down so much on the New York Times. Yes. Why do people always yell at the New York Times for the political coverage? 2016.
Mm-hmm.
That's it in a nutshell. It was terrible. What Trump did and what Clinton did were not equal. The media's self-assigned job to treat Republicans and Democrats equally has compelled them to pump up coverage of Democratic scandals. It's fairness signaling. The Republicans have overwhelmed the media with corruption. They've created scandal fatigue, prompting journalists to do something I call ethics norming. That's when something that would have been a huge scandal in the recent past is considered normal now. If news is defined as something unusual happening, GOP corruption is not news because the party's so widely corrupt. So some media have turned off their outrage impulse and decided corruption is normal. I'll give you another example of that. And that is that why are we having so much discussion about the filibuster?
I don't know.
Because Republicans refuse to vote for anything good. And
yes, all right, I see what you mean.
Like 50 Republicans in the Senate will not vote for anything decent, like a decent Voting Rights Act, or a pandemic relief when you need it, or any one of a number of things that the country needs to, get back on its feet. But the fact that Republicans refuse to vote no on anything, including blocking Supreme Court stuff, like Merrick Garland, who's in a different position right now, is so ubiquitous that it doesn't even get commented on anymore.
Yes, that has.
Why can't this pass? Why do we have to have filibuster reform? Because Manchin and Sinema have to be convinced about X, Y, and Z. Why? Because no Republicans will vote for that. We'll leave that out of the story. That's an everyday thing. We don't have to even comment on that anymore.
That's very true, and that does happen. Like we've certainly pointed it out a lot. It's absolutely happening.
Right, but even us, we stop thinking about it after a while.
Yeah, it's easy to do, right? We were focusing on the only people who might change their minds. I mean, that's a huge story that an entire party in Congress, which constitutes half of the United States Senate, has turned off all. And I am not interested in the facts or what could happen or helping anybody. The answer is no, and the answer is no because I don't like the other party and Joe Biden is president, and that makes me mad. I'm not helping. That's
so
huge.
Mark Jacobs says what's needed is new framing, not party-oriented, but democracy-oriented. And the reason that I'm honing in on this is with the anniversary coming up, it's really important how this gets covered. Truth-oriented. The media shouldn't elevate liars in the interest of fairness. Yes, media should be fair to the readers, to the facts, but not to the two-party system. We are now in the midst of an assault on democracy unlike any our country's ever seen. Any journalist who doesn't frame the reports in that context is doing a grievous disservice to our country. Good for you, Mark Jacobs. Good for you, Maureen Sullivan, and all the other journalists who say, no, this has to be covered differently.
Yeah, an excellent point. And just occurred to me, I mean, I guess you could distill one of those rules that he laid out down to, if you are still insistent, well, look, I have to get home from the job by 5:30 or whatever and coach the soccer team, and I feel like I have to do an even-handed job. If you need to fall back on the model of counting quotes, count quotes on, at least you could count quotes on have I presented both sides of a normal issue correctly, and as opposed to counting R's and D's. Like if there are some R's on the other side, you could count them among the pros and the others among the cons. It's very weird that they refuse to do that. Service to the two-party system.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. But just to be sure I'm fair to both sides, also not welcome back. So there you go. I've got quotes from both sides. Both welcome back to the show and get the hell out of here. Thank you. All right. Well, let's see. Greg, you want to continue on with this vein, or are we?
Yeah, for a little bit,
okay.
Before we turn to some pandemic stuff.
Pandemic.
But, part of the issue here is, why does it matter that the reporters cover something in a certain way? Isn't it true that those who you're trying to reach will just go to Fox and they won't hear you anyway? Right. No. Part of the problem is at this MEP Fuller, Matt Fuller, who is one of the congressional correspondents, wrote in the Daily Beast, by and large, the people who voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020 don't care about an insurrection. They don't care that he, honest to God, tried to overturn an election. They don't believe it was an insurrection.
Sure.
And that's true. But as we've said on the show many, many times, they are between 25 and 35% of the population on any given issue. And what matters hugely is everybody else. And if you convince everybody else, which, by the way, is happening, you may have polls like we talked about on Monday that show that most Republicans think this. You'll also find everybody else thinks that. Yes. 60, 65% 70% think Trump was involved with January 6th, blame him for it, think it was violence, think it was an insurrection, so on and so forth. And yes, the majority of Republicans are the 30% of the total population who don't think of that, but even there, only 60, 70% of them think that, So you do reach people. Not every Republican watches Fox yet. When their numbers drop,
really?
that'll be true. But it's not true now. There's still Republican-oriented people who don't watch Fox who still vote Republican. They are reachable by other means. And that's why it's so important that the January 6th committee does its job. I read today on Twitter that they're thinking of having their televised hearings during prime time, which I think is a great idea. The more people you reach, and I think it will be compelling TV, the more people you reach, the better.
Sure.
And one of the nice things about
show.
our one of the bad things that we have about the fractured media is that not everybody watches Walter Cronkite at the same time and therefore gets the same news. But one of the good things is that what people do watch, whether it's Wheel of Time or The Witcher or Downton Abbey or whatever you want to watch, you don't have to watch it right at that moment. So you could watch this live stuff and then watch your favorite stuff later, unless it's sports.
That's true. You don't have to miss out.
So you don't have to miss out. So I think all of that is important. But the idea that the reporters who were there, who were still traumatized by it, and are still having flashbacks.
Yes, they wanted to kill you.
They have impetus, whatever their editors say, to be pretty blunt about what happened and what is still happening.
Yeah, and a lot of them are, no doubt, faced some opposition from editors from expressing it, and a few of them pushed right past it or convinced their editors, no, this makes compelling content, as they say these days. Copy, I guess you used to say. But so we've seen a lot of their stories put out that way. And by the way, also, the various other independent outlets either taking to Twitter, or if your newspaper will punish you for taking to Twitter for things that they wouldn't allow you to put in print, Substack or whatever else there is out there, or publishing your own book and saving all the good stuff for then. But a lot of reporters now intent on letting everybody know just how crazy that situation was, and that's kept a lot of the flame alive, thankfully.
Right. So Empty Wheel had an interesting thing to say about one of the January 6th committee members, a very prominent one, Liz Cheney. Because, as you know, everybody on the right now hates her because she's a turncoat, and everybody on the left doesn't trust her because she's Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
But Empty Wheel says, say what you will about Papa Dick Cheney's daughter. She's learned some lethal bureaucratic tools from the master that she uses Ivanka to make it clear how much they knew. Power daughter kiss.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the reporting was Ivanka was in the room with Trump and said, stop the violence. Well, how do they have that kind of source? See, Empty Wheel says there was some question about what firsthand testimony Congresswoman Cheney was referencing, describing two pleas Ivanka made to her father. Keith Kellogg testified to the committee under a friendly subpoena. And we know this because it's from the book Peril, which I think is the Woodward Costa, Costa book. Right. As Kellogg and others watched, Ivanka went in 2 more times to see her father. Let this thing go, she told him. Let it go.
What a fine and moderating influence she is.
Right.
I mean,
so Empty Wheel then references MEP Fuller, Matt Fuller. Yeah. In the aftermath of January 6th, most of the media still hasn't really figured out how to cover Republicans. I'd include myself in that statement, says Fuller. We mostly just pretend January 6th didn't happen and take this in context with what we learned from Mark Jacob, as if it's totally normal to let Ron Johnson pontificate about gas prices or inflation while we ignore the lies he continues to spew about who's actually responsible for the attack, or the role he played in undermining our democracy and endangering those of us who were at the Capitol that day.
Yes.
That's why it's so annoying to listen to Rand Paul on any given day. It's difficult to write a story, Matt Fuller says, in which you stop in every paragraph to note whether the particular Republican you're mentioning returned to their chamber the night of January 6th with blood still drying in the hallway and voted to overturn the will of the people. But maybe we should.
Yes. And maybe we would take notice of it if you did and say, hey, this seems like an important point. It's being made over and
this
over
guy
again.
keeps saying that, Martin Johnson, who was one of the insurrectionists, or,
Yeah, and there will be complaints.
Jim Jordan, who was asked to speak to the committee, said the following about inflation.
Yeah, right, true. I mean,
it's
the
fine
grain
with
of
me
salt
if you
you're
just say
supposed to take it
disgraced
with.
in front of it, but that's a little subjective. But the fact that they were asked by the committee to testify, that's a fact.
Yeah. All right. Well, they ought to do things like that. They keep threatening to, too. But
Right. So, we're going to learn more.
I'm waiting.
And, one gets the impression from everything that's leaking from the committee, and these are intentional leaks. It's not sloppy work. It's keep your interest up by the time you get to the final episode. Of this season's January 6th committee. It's going to be interesting because everybody's going to want to see the finale. And that's why they're doing it. So I think it's important that happened. And the things that we're learning is that they know a lot. We don't know what they don't know. And, of course, we're still waiting on the National Archives issue with Trump, which, hopefully will be settled any day now.
Yes.
And, hopefully that stuff will then get sent to the committee for confirmation. But I think with the text and what they already have, they already know a lot. And trying to fight the committee to not get access to the stuff they already have access to the other way. Mark Meadows says, I won't turn over my text. And they say, well, we got Sean Hannity's.
Yeah, we got the other side of it.
We got the whole conversation here.
Yep. Well, that happens fairly frequently.
And to Sean, you can tell us you're not going to give it to us, but, we have Mark Meadows. It's the whole other side of the conversation. So why don't you just go ahead and give us everything?
Yep. You ought to. You ought to just fess up and take the consequences. That's my advice. Now, it's bad advice for you from a legal perspective, but I'm not your lawyer. I actually wanted to see you arrested. So,
right.
That full disclosure, I think you're guilty, but I think you should also give up all the evidence.
So, do you want the good news about the pandemic or the bad news?
Good. Start with
it might well be peaking in New York City already.
Oh, okay.
Just like it did in London and in South Africa. And if you squint at some of those graphs that I sent you up at the top of our secret personal feed, where I tell you what I think I might talk about and then don't.
Yes.
The first two graphs there, the first one is New York City hospitalization.
Okay. Yes.
Which makes a really, really important point that I want to highlight in this part of the segment.
All right.
And that is that people with Omicron are winding up in the hospital.
They are.
A lot of them. And if you look at the New York City graph, it goes not straight up, but pretty sharply up.
Yes.
Not as straight up as the cases. So we know that there's a dissociation between Omicron cases and severity. We know that.
Yeah.
We saw it in London. We saw it in South Africa. And we're seeing it in the United States. And so when people see that, they say to themselves, oh, well, it's not as severe as Delta was. And therefore, if it's not as severe as Delta was, it must be mild.
Oh, yes, right.
Or milder, at least.
Yes.
And the milder, at least, is true, but the mild part is not, and yet people glom onto that as if it is true. And because of that,
I see what you mean.
They say, oh, well, I forgot the milder part, and I'm just saying mild.
Yes,
fact,
it's shorter than milder. Right, it's a good point, and I guess we would illustrate it this way. You can still go to the hospital with Omicron, but in the early waves, when we didn't know what to, especially when we didn't know what to do, people were dying at home before they even made it to the hospital. So maybe you could call that milder. They were dying in
nursing homes and so on and so forth. But, here's the deal. If you are not vaccinated and you get Omicron, you certainly have a pretty good chance of getting sick. It doesn't mean everybody who isn't vaccinated will wind up in the hospital, but a lot of people will. And you can get pretty sick. But Omicron doesn't affect the lungs the way Delta does. Therefore, not as many people get pneumonia or will need oxygen. But that being said, Omicron is so much more infectious than Delta, so many more people get it, that it really puts a strain on the hospitals. And so hospitalizations have skyrocketed in New York City for COVID, and it's because of Omicron. So if it were really mild, why are all those people winding up in the hospital? That's also true for kids. The number of hospitalizations have gone up by a lot. Sure, a lot of kids don't get hospitalized in the first place, but the Omicron rate of hospitalization is like 5 times what it was for Delta. And so, yeah, it matters. And you can get sick enough so that you wind up in the hospital. You don't go into hospitals with mild cases of coronavirus.
You try to stay away if you can.
You try to stay away from hospitals altogether if you can.
Is the rate higher, you mean per person infected is as high as Delta, or just the sheer numbers of people?
But there's so many more people being infected that the total number seeing the hospital
That's the issue.
is higher.
Right.
A smaller number of a really large number is still a really large number.
Yes, that's the issue, and that's always been the issue, making people understand that when they used to say things like, well, maybe 1% of people die. Well, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, 10% of people, or 90% of people that get Ebola might die,
right?
But 10 people get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what's milder than that? COVID.
True.
Well, what if 1% of people die? Well, that's a lot less than 90%. It must be mild. Well, 1% of the United States.
Right. Give everybody Ebola, you'll be upset.
I don't know about the 1% number. I'm just making a point here.
You're right.
If it were so mild, how come 800,000 people are dead?
Yes.
Well, yeah, but that wasn't Omicron. Well, Omicron still kills people.
It's doing it right now.
It's still putting people in the hospital and so on and so forth. How do we know it's milder? Well, if you look at the ratio of who winds up in the ICU in the early cases versus who winds up in the ICU now.
Okay,
and I have that on the other graph I sent you, as well as the lead graph on the Daily Coast Post that I put up today. You can see that the ICU cases are not rising nearly as fast as the non-ICU cases. So you go in the hospital, but you stay on the general ward. You don't need to go into the ICU the way you used to.
Okay.
Why is that? Because it doesn't hit your lungs as much, and so your oxygenation needs aren't as much.
Yeah, all right.
Fine. But the ICU rise is still real. It's higher now than it was in September. And the non-ICU rise is enormous. It's more than it was last year when we had a peak.
I do see this. Yeah.
So there's an awful lot of people winding up in the hospital. Now, people see that and say, okay, but let me make the case, therefore, because it's my job to try to minimize this as much as possible to justify going out and drinking tonight. And therefore, my next line is, okay, well, many of these people are there with Omicron, not from Omicron. And so that's why I want to read you the next segment from Craig Spencer, our L-train Ebola doctor, who's a New York City ER guy.
Right.
Just leaving the ER, he wrote, just the other day on January 4th. It was a long day and a stunning amount of COVID. Today I worked in an area that was temporarily converted into a makeshift ICU during the first COVID wave. That means that they needed so much ICU space, part of the ER was taken.
Right.
Here's what's different from them, and also what challenges we're facing with this surge in New York City. Back in March 2020, we were flooded with so many sick and short of breath patients it seemed like there was nothing we could do. I almost never feel like that anymore. We've learned so much. We have treatments, high flow oxygen. That nightmare's over, but this is scary too. And he gives an example, March 24th, 2020. You're notified of another really sick patient coming in. You rush over. They're sick. They're vomiting. They need to be put on life support. You bring them back. 2 patients in rooms next to each other, both getting a breathing tube. It's not 10 a.m. yet. Okay, that was the only thing we saw in the emergency room. Now, record number of COVID cases are hitting at a time when the emergency rooms are already seeing extremely high numbers of non-COVID patients. Yes. It's winter, you have all your other reasons for going into the emergency room. And he says, thankfully, the COVID patients aren't as sick, but there's so many of them.
Yeah, well, like the old thing that we used to use as a meme on the internet all over the place. Would you rather fight one giant something or 100 tiny something else? Well,
yeah, a small percentage of a large number is a really large number.
They still need beds.
Today, it seemed like everybody had COVID, like so many, he says. And yes, like before, there was some really short of breath and needing oxygen, so some of them really do get sick. But for most, COVID seemed to topple a delicate balance of an underlying illness, and this is the important part about with and from COVID in the hospital.
Okay.
It's making people sick in a different way. Diabetics, in whom COVID precipitated diabetic ketoacidosis, a serious and life-threatening condition. Older folks sick with COVID, too weak to get out of bed, can't walk, can't leave the hospital. They didn't need a ventilator. Relatively few of them needed oxygen, but they needed hospitalization. And right now, New York City has over 5,000 COVID hospitalizations. That's more than last winter's peak. That's higher than any point since May 2020, and that was enormous. That was 3 times higher than 2 weeks ago, and it's still climbing higher every day. And what's also different is these COVID cases are often in beds next to patients who've done everything to avoid the virus, and so they're next to the cancer patient on chemo, the immunocompromised. It seems Omicron causes milder disease. We're not seeing as many patients gasping for air, but there's so much of it, and it's impacting patients in different ways. So even if just a tiny portion of cases needed to stay in the hospital, it can turn into a huge influx. Unlike March 2020, we have vaccines that remain the best way to stay out of the hospital. And even with Omicron, the unvaccinated still make up a disproportionate share of the sickest COVID patients and those needing treatment in the ICU.
Yes.
Okay. Plus,
I get that.
Colleagues are exhausted. Healthcare workers will get sick. The public doesn't really care about that anymore, but it's true. And so short staffing matters. I know you're tired of this, he writes. We are too, but we really need everybody's help to get through this again. And one of the ways you can help is by understanding that mild isn't mild. You know, I do not think this means what you think this means.
Yeah, and remember, again, I know everybody got tired of it and forgot about the whole purpose of flatten the curve, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, if you're a nurse or an orderly in the hospital and your job is however many people are in there, you got to empty the bedpans. It doesn't matter to you whether the COVID is mild or not. It matters how
especially
many people
if half the staff is out, so you got to do twice as many bedpans in half the amount of time.
Right. So
because there's twice as many patients.
No
so that
comfort to you, that the guy's
that's
mild.
a huge effect. Okay. And the other side of the coin is that it's not just here. Here's another long thread about what's going on with mild and with the UK, which is useful because they're ahead of us. And this is by John Byrne Murdoch, the guy from Financial Times, who does a wonderful job of visually putting together pieces that you could look at. Let's start with severity, the most important chart. Despite steep rises in cases and patients, the number on ventilators has barely risen. Patients have gone up. So they're straining hospitals, just not straining ICU. Same thing we're talking about here in the U.S. I've adjusted for lag between positive tests and severe disease, so the divergence between patients and ventilators is a marked difference between this and previous waves. The link between cases and severe disease is significantly weakened with Omicron. We track excess ICU pressure, but the latest data show the number of people in London ICUs has fallen, and it's not following the same path as last winter. So again, confirmation, it's milder or there's decoupling between getting the illness and winding up in the ICU. So he says that's 2 very strong signals. The wave isn't the same, and that's unambiguously good news. But once we dig deeper, it gets complicated. First is age. Cases have turned the corner among young adults, but rates among elderly have kept climbing. And just as night follows day, this has fed into hospital admissions. The share of admissions among people 65 and older has ticked upward. So that means that those patients also might get more serious.
Yeah.
Okay. The incoming age shift may cause severe disease numbers to tick upwards in the next week or two. But on the flip side, the growth in COVID-positive patients in London has slowed. So they also seem to be peaking. But that doesn't mean everything is fine in hospitals. Far from it. First of all, the sheer volume problem. While it's true that the number of incidental COVID patients has risen steeply during Omicron wave, the number with serious COVID is also rising very quickly. And those incidental COVID patients, as Craig Spencer said, may not be incidental, right? If you have diabetes and then you get COVID and it throws your diabetes out of control and you're admitted for diabetes, yes, and you're positive for COVID, your admission is for diabetes.
Yeah, but whose fault is it?
If you die,
COVID.
As many of the doctors who fill out death certificates will tell you, the cause of death is diabetes.
Yes.
It was COVID that put you in the hospital.
Right.
The fact that you're there with COVID instead of from COVID COVID is a distinction without a difference to the patient and to the doctor. Plus, you have to be isolated. Everybody has to gown up. You have to, do all the extra stuff you need to do with a COVID patient, putting stress on the hospital. The idea that we don't have to count the ones that are there with it because it was an incidental finding is ridiculous.
Yes.
At least anybody who takes care of patients knows that. So the COVID positive status is a major complicating factor that affects their non-COVID treatment and affects hospital resource management. So if soaring patient numbers is the demand side, the supply side is the number of staff available to treat them. And the number of hospital staff absent to COVID has shot up in the last week or two, setting new records in several hospitals in London.
Yes, I can expect that.
So during the first two big waves, hospitals scaled down the amount of non-COVID treatment to create capacity. They can't do that anymore because all the things that they put off, like your cancer surgery, have to be done now. And so this winter, they're trying to work through the resulting backlog of often very ill people waiting for treatment and far less headroom, far more stress. Oh, by the way, the front line points out that the pressure on emergency departments is immense.
I can imagine.
Okay. People stayed away from hospitals last year. This year, COVID comes on top of very high winter other pressures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And even though London's ICUs have far fewer COVID patients, there's still significant disruption, because the ERs and the wards, have all this pressure. So while ICU's under less pressure, the rest of the hospital's facing more. And interestingly, the critical care people may have to come off the ICU and go to the regular wards to try to take care of some of that stuff. First place they'd go is to the emergency department.
Oh, to pull people?
Well, they could,
they're
they're very good at judging
sent?
you're really sick, you're not really sick.
Oh,
They could help.
Okay, yeah.
They could take care of the really sick people in the ED, freeing up the ED docs to go see everybody else.
All right, I get it.
None of that's easy. None of, when you start taking people out of the areas and putting them in other areas, incredible stress.
I can imagine.
Right.
You want to be in one area. Just stay there.
Right. Here's another one. This is from M. Kit Delgado, MD. Based on increased immunity in the population and this lower severity strain of COVID, less people are presenting with a need for ICU level care. But a huge number, capital letters, need supportive care over 1 to 3 days, IV fluids, brief oxygen support, optimization of chronic illness, which reminds me of another aspect of this. He had COVID, but the reason he was in the hospital is he was dehydrated. He was dehydrated because he had COVID.
Yes.
But his hospital admission says dehydration. COVID is a comorbidity, a confounding factor. He was admitted for dehydration. He only is there with COVID because he tested positive for COVID when he got to the hospital. Yes, but that's what put him in the hospital.
Yeah, I mean...
there's so many cases of this that trying to make the distinction of, I'm only there for some other reason. Maybe it works for trauma. But even then, it's really tricky. Okay? I had an accident in the car. Was it because... Why? Well, I got dizzy. Why did you get dizzy? Well, because I had COVID.
Yeah. Or I had COVID and I got in the car to come to the hospital for treatment. Then I crashed. Now I'm here for a broken leg.
Right. So, nothing is simple. Okay. And that happens all the time in hospitals. Well, was it your blood pressure medicine adjustment that made you dizzy? We can't say that you were admitted to the hospital because of your blood pressure medicine adjustment. Mm-hmm. You were admitted with a broken leg.
Right. Well, we're familiar with this sort of issue, and just to connect it back to the politics, by the way, how do you count these things? And the procedure you use for the counting makes a big difference. If you, if you don't pry into the numbers, you might say COVID's not really a huge problem here, but apparently it actually is. But depending on how you count, well, have you colored outside of the lines on the little bubble?
Florida versus
New York.
New
Count
York.
Your vote. Yeah. Right. Or just say
we have an official in Florida who compared Florida to New York and said, look how badly New York does. Their number is 3 times ours. Well, that's because New York released post-holiday, 3 days worth of data compared to your 1 day. You knew that, and you tweeted that anyway.
Yes, well, they're trying very hard
had to take the tweet down, but they're trying really, really hard to say, it's not us, it's you. Look over there, squirrel.
Right. Florida's demolished by this, by the way, and the few numbers that they do report, every once in a while you get, even if they do it intermittently, you get a glimpse of, okay, this, you can figure out what the number really is based on the the few numbers that they let out. And then eventually they catch up anyway. They've jumped straight back up into the top 10 lists of everything that they thought they were off of.
Right. So a BBC reporter, Jim Reed, says, just looking at latest intensive care data published Friday, showing fairly substantial increase in proportion of unvaccinated patients admitted to ICU for COVID over the last month. It's gone from 48 to 61%. So the people winding up in the ICU are the unvaccinated who get Omicron, in other words. So how mild is it? What do you mean when you say mild? For the unvaccinated, it's still potentially bad. And again, is that a magazine or do you call it something else? Yeah, but you said that if you're unvaccinated and you get COVID, it's bad. But I know somebody who got COVID who was unvaccinated and it was just a cold. So you must be lying. Because there's 330 million people, and my single anecdote trumps your data.
Yes. Well,
on the entire country of the United Kingdom.
Well, yeah, sure. Or you can do that in the UK. It's different.
Well, you can do that here on Twitter because Twitter is what it is, but it doesn't mean that stuff's true.
Right. True. Okay.
Or as Marco Rubio said, this is just a glorified sore throat. I don't understand what all the fuss is all about.
Oh, ha ha ha. 2 years into it. Okay, right. Like there's not piles of dead people in Florida.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that COVID Omicron gives you, more sore throat. It's more upper respiratory. And so if he knew that Omicron gives you more sore throat, he must be somewhat familiar with what's going on. And he still wrote that.
Yeah.
You got to work that hard to be that stupid.
Yeah, well, it does come naturally to some people.
So that means he's lying.
Yes. Right.
Getting back to our original segment.
Yeah.
And so say so. He's lying because he did the research and look what he found, and that's what he decided to do. So he's deliberately misleading, which, by the way, in 2022, that means he's lying.
Yeah. And you should get rid of him as a result. Well, we always knew he was inclined to that. Okay. Well, we can continue the conversation tomorrow. Thank you for
We will. That's my rant for today.
Excellent.
Hopefully nothing else breaks, and,
yeah.
We'll see.
Okay. Keeping an eye on a new variant in France. That can be saved for tomorrow. How exciting.
It doesn't seem to be much.
Good. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, we'll have some more to say about that tomorrow, but apparently there is a new variant, and it's got a weird name, and they haven't given it a Greek name yet, and I don't know if they're going to, but in case you see people running around talking about it, they've identified it in France, and as you know, under the new protocols, we now all say they've got the French flu, and we can blame it all on them. We don't really know that, of course, where the thing started, just that's where it's been identified, just as was the case with Omicron. It was not something that apparently developed first in South Africa. They just noticed it first, and then everybody tried to blame them for it. And I don't even know whether we have our travel straightened out with them yet or not, but you shouldn't be flying anyhow. Stay home and stop spreading this stuff. It's being referred to, as far as I can tell, as the IHU variant. I don't know what that stands for. We can ask Greg tomorrow. It might not be important. It might be French, in which case we won't be able to pronounce it. I don't know why it's labeled that. So Greg says, all right, what it is. On the way out the door, he was able to say, well, it sounds like it might not be such a big deal, but I don't know. And I'm sure he would probably tell you he doesn't know either just now. It's just too new. But yes, people are worried about it. It's out there, and I don't know. We'll see what happens. As a matter of fact, let's see. What do we have here from The Independent? I won't be able to read it, I guess, because I think they're paywalled. But there it is. IHU, new COVID variant with 46 mutations, worries experts in France. So far, 12 people have been infected with the new variant. So it's, as Trump would say, it's 12 cases. It'll soon be down to 0. Maybe it will be. I don't know. I don't know whether 46, it implies that 46 mutations is an awful lot, but I don't know how many mutations can you have? There may be no upper limit to it. Anyway, we'll have to ask the experts about that one. It's got one of those funky medical numbers, B1642. I don't know how they handle the dots, the periods, the decimal points, whatever, B dot, 1 dot, dot, that's very scientific of me to use dot for that. But anyway, I don't know. I can tell you nothing about it except for the fact that there it is, and people on Twitter are talking about it, and now we have to wait and see what the hell it's going to do, and is it better or worse, indifferent, but if you thought this is the end of the variants because this one's milder and we're all going to get it and then we'll all be immune from everything eventually and yada yada, well, I guess it won't actually work that way. Omicron didn't care that you were immune from Delta, from having had Delta, so, we'll wait and see. In the meantime, mask, mask, mask. And, of course...
Oh, my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking f***s.
You can't beat that advice. And you shouldn't try, either. All right, let's see. Other things happening. Definitely true. Let me look into Pocket and back on the Twitter feed and see what were all those things that seemed so important earlier in the day that I couldn't wait to talk about on the air, but then realized I had forgotten about later on. Okay, well, one story, very important story for our Why Do We Get Out of Bed in the Morning files. Don't work. Stop doing what you're doing. Quit. You can make a fortune on the internet no matter what. It doesn't matter how stupid it is. I unfortunately have to report to you that in what I thought could make an excellent Onion article, it turns out somehow to be true. And I'm sure this idea has probably occurred to you, probably somewhere along the line where you said, this whole internet thing, the things people are doing to make money, it's so dumb, I'm going to blank, blank, blank. That's the dumbest thing I can think of. And people will probably buy it because there are so many people in the world with so many stupid ideas about what they should do with their disposable income. It probably landed on, you've come up with weirder ones, but you probably at some point contemplated, how dumb could it possibly get? Someone could bottle farts and sell them on the internet. And the news here is efficient markets theory says that someone has already come up with that idea. So one notch in the column for efficient markets theory because somebody did. Somebody who was on one of the reality TV shows that I can't keep track of, 90 Day Fiancé. Don't really know exactly what that one's about, but I can imagine, and it's not a good idea, and I guess anybody who was at some point in danger of becoming engaged to this person may have escaped, although I guess you could have, maybe you would have lived a luxurious lifestyle based on her sales here. 90 Day Fiancé star retires, though, from selling farts after a heart attack scare, according to the New York Post, which is where you should turn for everything, obviously. I don't know this person, thank God, and I don't know. Do we spend any time on this? Not really. Long story short, at some point, she decided, probably maybe as a dumb joke, thought, I'm an internet, social media influencer type person, by which, at this point, influencer on social media means generally that you wear a certain kind of makeup or have had a certain kind of plastic surgery or look like you have. And therefore, apparently, I guess, not to be gender specific about it, but all those attracted to this particular gender, for whatever reason, will listen to you and pay you to do dumb stuff, including buying, I assume there's some sexual element to this for whatever reason, buying bottled farts from somebody that they think is, I guess, attractive. And this happened, and I'll give her this. She was very industrious and dedicated to her craft in that she said, oh, well, as dumb as people are, they are buying bottled farts on the internet. And at some point she made like $50,000 a week. Well, it says $50,000 a week doing this. Now that I don't know how sustained that burst was, no pun intended, but it could be just for 1 or 2 weeks when there was, like a tulip craze. This week it's a bottled fart craze, and everybody's got to have the, remember, if it doesn't come from the bottled fart region of France, it is simply what? A highly carbonated flatulence. I don't know, but I guess her brand of it was special and exciting. She has other hustles going on, and I imagine that a lot of that pays better on a more sustained basis. Like, for instance, a YouTube channel where people do somehow make lots of money. It says she wrote books. I don't know what the books are about, but probably, haha, you bought a bottled fart from me, a memoir. And also has founded an X-rated subscription site. Do you want to know which one? It's called Unfiltered. I say it because it's not one of those names that you can't read on the radio. Unfiltered, but as you know, a fancy thing to do for yourself on the internet to make it yourself look cool is to spell the word wrong or leave out some of the letters. And she leaves out the last E in Unfiltered. We leave off the last E for I'm an idiot, which, has been spelled wrong, but you're an idiot, so it's okay. So she has an X-rated subscription site. Those seem to make a lot of money, and that's probably where most of the money comes from. And anyway, what can I tell you? She bottles farts, and then she made $50,000 doing it. So she said, she's not totally disconnected from reality in the sense that she said, if this is true and people will buy these on a sustained basis, shouldn't I ramp up production? That's like a legit economic decision to be made. And this is the problem with everything in the world, including economics. This person is a rational economic actor by the definition that we use in economics, I guess. So as though I was an economist. But is that not a rational economic decision? So what do you do when you need to ramp up production and your product is bottled farts? Well, you, as apparently what she did, she changed her diet so that she could produce more product. And essentially what happens here is she ends up hospitalized thinking she's having a heart attack. And I don't know whether she also had additional attendant health issues that go along with either because of this, or was she in the hospital with farts or from farts? That's the real question here. We have to classify it somehow. But she gave herself just essentially terrible gas, which, well, duh. Yeah, that's what farts are. And she was having these chest pains and this rising, from her gut to her chest cavity. It happens when you have excessive gas. And how do you have excessive gas? You try too hard to ramp up production so that you can bottle the stuff. And if we could just take out the economic incentive, she probably could change her diet and be a very happy, healthy person. But anyway, she thought she was having a heart attack. Then later in the article, she switches over and thinks she's having a stroke. Honestly, I think what's happening here is she thought she was having a heart attack because of all the gas. And I am having a stroke because I just found out why she has so much gas. And the fact is that she's got all this money. And, clearly there are people across America, somebody. You couldn't make anything of yourself. You have this problem naturally. Why didn't you make $1 million selling these things? And the answer is I'm not willing to, make myself up this way and take pictures of everything that I do on Instagram. But that's what happens. So there you go. If you're ever thinking about working harder or doing something meaningful in life, stop, give up, don't even bother. You could be bottling farts. I don't know what's going on, by the way. The bottles, she's got something going on with the packaging. She bought some very nice bottles. They really look more like jars and very wide mouthed jar to it. So I guess that helps with getting the product placed. Like if you have a really skinny mouth to the bottle, you got to have good aim, right? I guess, if there's such a thing. Or you're going to have to bottle, as they say, in the biz, because I'm in the biz now, direct from the source, which is, sometimes, and in that case, perhaps the narrow-necked bottle might help. Anyway, I don't know what's going on, but she's got something else is in the jar here. I cannot tell what it is, and nobody will describe it, and maybe it's best that they not do it, but there's some object inside the jar, which I imagine was included in as a PR move. We have to, do. Otherwise, we're just sending people what looks like empty jars, and they're going to feel ripped off. And we can't have that among the fart buying public. Because what would happen? So I don't know what she puts in there. I mean, honestly, it actually looks like a butterfly or something that got thrown in there. And maybe that's it. We put a live butterfly in a jar, and that's how you know the fart is of high quality. It suffocates the butterfly. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. It's except it should not be happening, and yet that money should be handed over to me immediately. I don't know. Anyway, that happened. Another thing happened. A funny thing happened on the way to today's show that I didn't put aside, but I can scroll back. A very prominent, big-mouth Republican anti-vaxxer, anti-masker person has died of COVID. Yes, I know. It's a huge surprise. This one is from Orange County, California. She apparently, like I said, a very famous anti-vax, anti-mask big mouth. Her name was, I think, Kelly Embry, I believe was her name. And she, as recently as December 4th, had been an invited speaker at a Turning Point USA event put on by, I guess, jointly by the Cal State Fullerton and UC Irvine chapters, I think, of Turning Points USA. They invited, it looks like a total of 5 outside guest speakers, and that was on December 4th, and 1 is already dead. So 1 out of 5, 20% of the invited speakers are dead. The headline, of course, should be Turning Points USA kills its guest speaker, but so far we haven't gotten that kind of honesty on the headline. And instead, it's more of the ironic talk. But Turning Points USA doing dangerous work out there, and who knows who else is being killed by this. Anyway, I guess everybody else is on a death watch now who was a speaker there. I checked into it just to see, once I saw that she was a guest speaker at some confab or another, I wanted to make sure, was it not the one that... was it not the one that Mike Flynn and friends were at? No, she's not that famous. That was the one that they had at ironically, at the Equestrian Center, I think, down in Florida. This was just something in Fullerton, California. 1 out of 5 now dead. By the way, if you want to monitor results, one of the other speakers was Amy Fan West, who is another, Orange County area ultra-Republican nut job. She, I believe, is declared for Congress for Katie Porter's seat. I don't know whether they wouldn't have straightened out their primaries yet, so she may be just one of several lunatics. But on the other hand, I guess Katie Porter can wait and see, play the wait and see game, because all of her opponents or potential opponents may die before election season. Chief among the speakers here, Don Wagner, who himself is apparently something of a figure in Orange County area Republican politics, and he organized the panel of speakers with the Turning Points kids. There's a Dr. Michael Huang, who also was a speaker there, who apparently gained some local fame in recent months as the doctor to go to if you wanted a fake medical exemption to get out of mask wearing, probably among the students who invited him to the event. And one of the student leaders from Turning Points USA, Marcos Zelada. So keep an eye on him, and we'll keep a tally. I have the event web page's picture of the panel of speakers here. And I guess as they die from COVID, we'll mark them off and see how many of the 5 are undone by their own activity. Anyway, just wanted to mention that because it's important to note for people who are big believers in these people and follow them. It's important to note when they die and see if somebody could possibly change their mind and say, maybe I shouldn't be listening to these people from now on. Okay. Let's see, other things that I need to share with you that, let me scroll past the fart stuff here. Production assistants have an important addition here. I like it, though. Well, let's see. But if it does go, yeah. So, no, that would be a waste of the product. She was suggesting farm to toilet as the label here. But if you waste it in the toilet, no one ever gets the benefit of it, right? Yeah, all right. Well, unfortunately, maybe more here. Fart to table might be more like it because people are actually consuming these things at some point. I don't know. I don't know that. Does anybody, any collectors want to let us know? Do you just keep them on the shelf and collect the farts of famous people and say that, or do you let them out? I mean, is it like wines that you want to age on a rack somewhere, or is it like collector's item toys that you want to leave in the original packaging? Well, perhaps never find out. Okay, let's see. Other stories that I wanted to share with you. This is let's see. We'll call this a counter example here. I saw this one. Marcy Wheeler actually, in rebutting this, brought it to my attention. But I thought it might be interesting to read the article she was rebutting first because it's an annoying counter example of good sense and judicious thinking, I think, from the what would we call this? Online publication Verdict, legal analysis and commentary from Justia. I don't even know what Justia is, but I guess legal profession discussion group of some kind here. Anyway, publishing this from I guess, as I understand it, from Empty Wheels rebuttal, Austin Sarat, S-A-R-A-T. I was wondering if he just misspelled Surratt, given how he's approached things here. But a professor of jurisprudence and political science at Amherst College, and I guess a professor that Marcy took courses with, and possibly others who you might know from among the blogosphere as well. So anyway, here's a provocative headline from December 31st. Prosecuting Trump may be right, but unwise. You have to keep an eye on this sort of thing every once in a while and rebut it when you can. Let's see. I thought I might read through it and perhaps see if our own rebuttal makes itself apparent. The approaching anniversary of January 6th, that's tomorrow, it's approaching. This is as close as you can get to it without passing it. As close without going over, like Price is Right. So, the approaching anniversary of the January 6th insurrection and the intensifying work of the House Select Committee investigating the uprising have spurred new calls to indict and prosecute and hang high-ranking Trump administration officials and the former president himself. Yes. Those now urging such actions argue that letting Donald Trump off the hook for inciting violence and for obstructing a congressional proceeding would be severely damaging to the rule of law. It would violate the simple proposition that no person is above the law. That's true. And as a matter of fact, he does get to a point in another paragraph or two that I think is very pertinent to that. Based on what we now know, there appears to be ample reason for Attorney General Merrick Garland to launch a criminal probe of Trump. And we've discussed also on the show with Greg the wisdom of doing that at the behest of or after a reference from the Select Committee, or whether it's better for the DOJ to reach that conclusion independently. By the way, you could short-circuit that by jumping out and opening your own criminal probe and announcing it now, and then take all the pressure of deciding whether or not to do that off of the committee. That would be helpful. But even if such a probe turned up evidence to justify prosecution, it is not clear that it would be wise for him, Garland, and the Biden administration to initiate that process. Meanwhile, local prosecutors can make their own judgments about the former president's criminal culpability. So it's another step removed from, I don't know, maybe this is political buck passing, but remember that the argument was made, well, the committee shouldn't refer it to DOJ because then that makes it look like DOJ is bowing to political pressure. Then I guess you could say, well, the attorney general ought not to be the one to announce a criminal probe or criminal charges, because it should really fall to local prosecutors to do it instead, because otherwise it looks political. Now, sometimes that prosecutor will be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and I don't know who's supposed to buy the idea that he doesn't talk to the Attorney General, or she. I don't even know who the U.S. Attorney is in D.C., but could be anywhere. Could be New York City. Could be the whatever district of Florida Palm Beach falls into. Any number of places that you could do this. Anyway, so where did we leave off? Yes, right. Meanwhile, local prosecutors can make their own judgments about the former president's criminal culpability. And maybe there's a good point to that, too. Like if there are, let 1,000 flowers bloom. If there are more prosecutors who have reason to believe they may have jurisdiction over criminal liability for Trump or Trump-related idiots in their district, go for it. Why not? It increases the odds. Ironically, he continues, the case for prosecuting Trump was raised last February. This is the point I was hoping he would make. By none other than Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Remember this? This is a good point. Good reminder. Explaining why he voted against convicting Trump during his second impeachment trial, McConnell said that, quote, impeachment was never meant to be the final forum for American justice. Instead, he noted that, quote, we have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation, and former presidents are not immune from being held accountable by either one. Right? That is a good point. Speaking about January 6th, McConnell went on to say that former President Trump's actions that preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. Trump, he concluded, is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. Now, we know that he's backed away from doing anything about it, but remember, that would be a great speech to use, if not against him, then in favor of the idea of prosecution at some point by somebody, wouldn't you say? Remember, we couldn't hold him accountable in the forum where we could, at least theoretically, ban him from from holding any federal public office in the future, if they obey that law or the Constitution or whatever in the future. We don't know whether there will be a Constitution in the future. But at any rate, you could have used that against him. But he said, no. Not only is he a former president, then should we not be using impeachment against a former president? I think it's fine. I think it was designed that way. But he said, well, look, you have other options. If you really think this is a horrible thing that he did, and I do, let's prosecute him for it. So let's. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham joined McConnell in saying that those calling for Trump's impeachment, that the right way to respond was through conventional legal means. If you believe he committed a crime, Graham said, he can be prosecuted like any other citizen. Impeachment is a political process. True, understood, and maybe we should have gone with the political process because, as it turns out, criminal justice is a political process too. And part of that process is apparently we don't prosecute former presidents, even if we very rarely prosecute former or current politicians at all, certainly not at the rate that they ought to be prosecuted, and former presidents basically never. And I don't know, that's part of the old norm. Well, we don't do that. That makes us a banana republic. Well, what makes us a banana republic in this case is not prosecuting people who are staging coups left and right. Although in some banana republics, they do a pretty good job at tamping down coups and executing the people who attempt failed ones. It's not always a hallmark of a great society, but it does tend to deter coup plotting to some extent. Although then people get upset about the repression and well, it's a cycle that feeds on itself. A month before McConnell and Graham talked about prosecuting Trump, Washington, D.C.'s Attorney General Karl Racine, who was responsible for enforcing D.C.'s criminal laws, had already been doing so. He noted that local law makes illegal the statements of individuals that clearly encourage, cajole, and otherwise, get people motivated to commit violence. Racine speculated that Trump could be charged with a misdemeanor a 6-month in jail maximum for his role on January 6th. Well, maybe under the laws that were available to him as D.C. Attorney General, but maybe he could find a way to turn up the heat a little bit. More recently, the Boston Globe's editorial board urged Merrick Garland to abandon this country's long-standing reluctance to prosecute former leaders. While recognizing what it called legitimate concerns about the justice system being used to settle political scores, the Globe concluded that there is only one way left to restore deterrence and convey to future presidents that the rule of law applies to them. The Justice Department, it said, can only do so by indicting and prosecuting Donald Trump for his conduct in office. It all seems to make sense so far. Where does he turn off the road? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Let's continue on with the Austin Surratt piece here. I'm curious to see, after laying such a great foundation for prosecuting, why he turns off the road. Let's see. The Globe, we just read about their justification for indicting and prosecuting Trump. The Globe rightly described the events of January 6th as an extreme abuse of power that few ever imagined a president would commit. That's certainly true. A commander-in-chief tried his very best to subvert democracy. He attacked his own country. That's treason. Like actual honest-to-God treason. Allowing him to go unpunished, especially when it's a capital crime, would set a far more dangerous precedent than having Trump stand trial. Yes. Again, invoking rule of law rhetoric, the Globe argued that prosecuting Trump would make clear that no person, not even the president, is above the law. This month, New York Magazine added its voice to the chorus, similarly arguing that upholding the rule of law required prosecution of the former president. Columnist Ryan Cooper also advised Attorney General Garland to take the rule of law and Trump's manifold crimes seriously now, file charges tomorrow, and keep him out of office forever. Paradoxically, these repeated incantations about the rule of law, frankly, add little to the case for prosecuting Trump. Let's find out why he thinks so. The rule of law does not require that a prosecutor move forward, even when there is probable cause to do so. It's true. The concept of the rule of law is a capacious one. Capacious? Yeah, all right. Made up of multiple and sometimes even conflicting norms and values. But however one thinks about the rule of law, it does not mean that every violation of the law, indeed, even the most serious ones, must be met with criminal prosecution. Okay, I guess we can grant that point. Federal law accords prosecutors enormous latitude in deciding who or what to investigate, indict, and bring to trial. Ham sandwiches or otherwise, right? I mean, yes, we understand prosecutorial discretion is a thing. It exists. So long as there is no evidence of vindictive or selective prosecution, courts have rarely interfered when a prosecutor decides not to do so. Then Attorney General Robert Jackson might have been exaggerating when he said in 1940 that the prosecutor has more power over life, liberty, and reputation than any other person in America. Back in the days of shame, I understand he was dealing with. But he was certainly correct in observing, simply and matter-of-factly, that his discretion is tremendous. Long-standing Supreme Court precedents support Jackson's view. As the court explained in a decision almost half a century ago, so long as the prosecutor has probable cause to believe that the accused committed an offense defined by statute, the decision whether or not to prosecute and what charge to file or bring before a grand jury generally rests entirely in his discretion. Figuring out what to do about Trump is really more about prudence, wisdom, and statesmanship than it is about fidelity to the rule of law. Even when faced with enormous wrongs, the most conscientious legal officials cannot avoid balancing interests that are often complex. So we have a door open here, but so far, and no reason to go through it. So I assume that's coming in the last part of the article. Here, the dictum about hard cases making bad law seems apt. What is that dictum, by the way, in case you were wondering? Thankfully, it's helpfully linked here. Although it's just a link to the new Yale Book of Quotations, in which I am sure this dictum is deposited, but it doesn't actually point to it. So that's not helpful, but I get the idea. Hard cases make bad law. Okay, fine. Why? It's not my dictum. I can't explain it to you. Anyway, reasonable people, including some of the nation's most acute legal minds, have reached different conclusions in what is undoubtedly one of the thorniest cases to come down the pike in a long time. I understand those differences and feel torn about the wise thing to do, so he's not even sure. I recognize that while not all the evidence is in, there is the strong case that if Trump's actions are not prosecutable, though they are, then there would be nothing a president can do that would justify indictment after they leave office. As the Boston Globe editorial explains, it cannot be the case that there is no line, no hypothetical act of presidential criminality that would not rise to the level of seriousness that merits setting aside our qualms about prosecution. And if one accepts that there is a line, it's hard to imagine Donald Trump didn't cross it. Okay. There are, in fact, good reasons to worry that a decision not to prosecute the former president would mean, as New York Magazine observed, that elite political impunity would continue unabated, and the Justice Department's failure would incentivize even more high-level government misconduct in the future. So far, 3/4 of the way into the article, it actually sounds like you should prosecute him, and it would be wise. Here's, I guess, the turning point. Yet I worry that going forward with even a well-grounded prosecution of Trump would almost certainly turn him into a martyr, fuel a furious attack on the Biden Justice Department for using prosecution as a political weapon, spur violent outbursts, and plunge this country ever closer to the abyss, which it seems to be fast approaching. Okay, at least I understand what kind of concern. I don't know if it's a valid one in my view, but I see what kind of concern is being expressed here. By the way, this was all successfully avoided by machine gunning Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife on the spot. It was a horrific and extrajudicial act, and probably should never be countenanced in American politics, but it did settle the issue. There wasn't any anniversary speech against the uprising, as you know, that the procedural posture there in Romania was slightly different, but there wasn't any attempt to rally troops to retake power a year after or at any point afterwards, because he had been machine gunned. He was dead. The end. He was perhaps considered a martyr by some hardcore old-line communists, but the fact that their martyr was, in fact, a martyr and dead and had been machine-gunned with little fanfare and lots of brutality, and video and pictures of the event circulated around the country and around the world, many of them were, let's say, disincentivized from even considering the idea of an uprising in his name, whether on the anniversary of his death or any other day. It took a lot of the wind out of the sails of people who would have held him up as a hero. And perhaps it's not exactly the same situation here. And there are lots of people who believe that they would be able to defend themselves against being machine gunned on the spot and, in fact, machine gun the machine gunners. But even a small pile of corpses tends to change a lot of minds among the rank and file there. It might harden some views, but a lot of people chicken out fast. Just sort of putting that out there. So, where were we before we got into the brutal aspects of this thing? We're in the genteel world of law. Yet I worry, he says, that going forward with even a well-grounded prosecution would turn him into a martyr. An investigation and potential indictment and trial of Mr. Trump, Eric Posner warns, would give the circus of the Trumpian presidency a central place in American politics for the next several years, sucking the air out of the Biden administration and feeding it into Mr. Trump's politically potent claims to martyrdom. Not if he was dead. Mr. Trump will portray the prosecution as revenge by the deep state and corrupt Democrats. And that is all true, and yet I tell you that Osama bin Laden has succeeded in doing no such thing from the bottom of the ocean. This difficult judgment does not mean that Attorney General Garland should do nothing. He can serve justice by building on the work of the House committee and helping to fully develop the facts of what Trump did in the lead up to and on January 6th. Garland should present those facts clearly, logically, and with irrefutable documentation, and he should do what McConnell and Graham suggested in February by citing chapter and verse the numerous federal criminal laws that Trump violated. The Attorney General can and should make a record for history to judge. Oh boy. Good old Judge History. He's awesome. I'd rather give him to Judge Steve Harvey at this point. Our country has a long tradition of coming to understand past abuses, only after a considerable period of time, like the ye old Civil War, which we still think is about states' rights, and people were really good to their slaves. Sure. History. Fantastic. Establishing a record of Donald Trump's crimes would make such a future reckoning possible, and it would give less oxygen to the former president's immediate wish to dominate the headlines, rile up his most ardent supporters, and whine about how unfairly he has been treated. I offer you once again another perfect solution. Execute him. That wouldn't stop his supporters from treating him as a martyr, but it would stop the former president's immediate wish to dominate the headlines, rile up his most ardent supporters, and whine about how unfairly he's been treated. Now, he would have been treated unfairly. He would finally have a point. And it is true, people can rally around a martyr. But let's acknowledge that Donald Trump has a unique ability to be able to push the right buttons on these people's computers, as it were, and make them do things in ways that other demagogues just really honestly have never succeeded in doing before. Not in this country, not to this level, not this directly and this obviously. Death puts a stop to it, in my view. I can't say that it's the most judicious thing. That also might not be wise, but it might be very practical. There just aren't that many people who can rally the troops the same way that he has. Let me conclude this piece. I'll read it. There's just one more little paragraph. This may not satisfy all those who want to see Trump brought before the bar of justice. I don't know if I even count myself as that number anymore. Would I be satisfied seeing him brought before the bar of justice? Well, for treason maybe, yeah, where he could be executed. I need to go around the bar of justice and just put an end to this madness. Anyway, but this may be one of those instances where the thing that we are justified in doing is not necessarily the wisest thing to do. Okay, well, you know what? He actually doesn't really make a case for it at all. Quite honestly, that was pretty weak at the end, that the basic premise of why it might not be the wisest thing to do, and it's not required by the rule of law. Okay, so tell me, what do you suggest? I suggest we put together a strongly worded report and let history be the judge. No, I'm actually not convinced by that. So, okay, it's a powerless piece. It doesn't end up introducing any new arguments. But it does give me a powerful jumping off point to saying that maybe the wisest thing to do isn't necessarily the one that's justified by rule of law. It's the one where the outrage of the moment gets the better of you, and then you look back and say, gosh, yeah, in a perfect world, we probably would have brought that guy to trial. Or, we could of course, or maybe we say it's un-American to do such things. But, I'm reminded that, for instance, we hang Saddam Hussein, or, we said somebody else, you go hang Saddam Hussein, or else we won't give you any money or won't give you your country back. We run this place now anyway through the provisional authority, et cetera, et cetera. But you Iraqis, you guys execute. You wanted to anyway. You wanted to. Hang them. We still hang people. We just get proxies to do it. So, I don't know. I'm unconvinced. Of course, this, like I said, just amounts to, well, what if it only makes it worse? Well, what if it doesn't? What if it makes it fantastic? Have you considered that? What if it's an amazing, awesome thing to do as a capstone to the Trump era to riddle him with bullets in front of a firing squad and dump his body in the ocean? I don't know. Well, we don't do that. But yeah, we just did. We just did. The last president did it. Oh, but that guy was, a Saudi citizen who had declared war against the United States and was a terrorist leader. Donald Trump declared war against the United States. Donald Trump is a terrorist leader. It's just he was born here. We're embarrassed about that, but it's true. Do what we do with others. Saddam Hussein, hang him. Osama bin Laden, shoot him and dump his body in the ocean. Donald Trump, maybe we shouldn't do anything. Maybe history will judge him. Yeah, maybe. I don't think so. Well, at any rate, don't take that guy's course. Or take it and enjoy it. It might give you some, interesting thought experiments to go. He's probably a very fine professor. And he's just heavier on the prudence than the jurist, I guess. Anyway, I thought that was of some interest. By the way, McConnell also, just in case you were wondering, how big a grain of salt to take McConnell's words. McConnell gave some comments yesterday before the press, objecting to the Democrats' plans to change filibuster rules to pass, as Sahil Kapoor puts it, democracy/election legislation, just in his tweets, in his informal tweets, telling people what was going on at the press conference. So a little offhanded reference to that, but, very important legislation. McConnell, of course, objects to the idea of changing the filibuster rules for many reasons. Chief among them is he will lose the fight, and he doesn't want to do that. So he takes this very high-minded approach. It's too bad that it wasn't, uppermost in Sahil's mind to ask a follow-up question like this. Or maybe he did, and it just didn't work out all that well as we imagine it would have worked out. But it's one of those instances where, like with Greg, when we were discussing the armchair pundits, like me, second-guessing the questions getting asked at a press conference. But yeah, in hindsight, you do want to see questions like this asked. So McConnell says, make no mistake about it, this is genuine radicalism. He's speaking of the idea that there should be, say, a carve-out from the filibuster rule to allow majority vote passage of voting rights legislation. Make no mistake about it, this is genuine radicalism. They want to turn the Senate into the House. We've heard that a million times before. They want to make it easy to fundamentally change the country. So he's got a lot to say about how terrible it is now. Lots of people said, wait a minute, fundamentally changing the country would be great, especially after the Trump era. Fundamentally changing from that would certainly be awesome. So not everybody is convinced that fundamentally changing the country is a bad thing. But supposing you were the kind of person who thought turning the Senate into the House was a terrible thing to do, and that fundamentally changing the country, or making it too easy, let's say, to fundamentally change the country is also a bad thing, and that to do so was genuine radicalism. You might think that a person like that wouldn't do such a thing, except, of course, we've already seen him do exactly that thing for Supreme Court nominations in particular, and it's widely suspected that he would, in fact, take advantage of the ability to change the rules in a situation in which he needed it if he felt that he wanted to and thought it was warranted and would have Republican support to do so. We all worry about that. But it also gives us the opportunity to say, well, okay, here's a question for you then. Are you basically saying that it's your position and the Republican position that you will change the rules back? Would you reinstate filibuster rules when and if Republicans take control of the Senate? Because obviously, making it too easy to make radical change in the direction of the country, or as he puts it, fundamental change in the country, and turning the House into the Senate, or the Senate into the House. Those are obviously terrible things, as you just portrayed them. Now you're handed control of a Senate which has been, unfortunately, turned into the House, and from which it is now too easy to fundamentally change the country. What are you going to do? And his answer is, I'm going to Disney World. Not, I'm changing it back to where it ought to be because I want my turn to play too. It's not fair. It wouldn't be fair if Democrats turned the Senate into the House, and if Democrats made it too easy to fundamentally change the country. We Republicans must, in the name of basic fairness, also turn the Senate into the House, or keep the Senate the House, and too easily fundamentally change the country, and leave the door open to do so in the future forevermore, as opposed to changing the rules back, which of course wouldn't work anyway, because Democrats would then come back and say, well, we thought the rules were right the way we had them, we'll change it back. Yes, it would go back and forth. Yes, it would flip-flop. Only, though, if Republicans really meant it when they said that changing filibuster rules, or leaving them changed, was a terrible thing. They don't actually believe it's a terrible thing. They want it to happen so that when they are in the majority, they can do what they want, but they want Democrats to do that work for them. They think, we'll show them, we will get rid of the filibuster rule and run rampant, right? We'll rampage over America and change it fundamentally in our direction when they do the work of changing the filibuster rule. And some people take that as reason not to do it. Well, if we do it, then they will be able to do those things. Well, they'll be able to do those things anyway. They'll simply change the rules, and they'll have to suffer the momentary embarrassment of saying, yeah, remember when someone will say, Sahil Kapoor, didn't you say this was a terrible thing to do? One option, the Donald Trump option, is to say, no, I didn't. You're lying. Mitch McConnell's option is usually along the lines of, the situation was different. They wanted to pass something fundamentally terrible for America. We want to pass something fundamentally great for America. And so therefore, your comparison is entirely inapt. And Sahil Kapoor, to his credit, will likely say, that's BS. I will write it up as BS. And Mitch McConnell will say, you do that and I will run the country. You write a stinging rebuke and I will get what I want. That's the trade that he'll make for it. So anyway, and by the way, turning the Senate into the House, one way to turn the Senate into the House would be to, let's say, just hypothetically, what if you wrote and adopted special rules for the consideration of individual bills in the Senate the way they do in the House, such that there would be a time limit that never before existed on debate in the Senate, but only for consideration of one particular debt ceiling bill. And if you really wanted to put a fine point on it, you would let the House adopt that rule for you first. The actual House actually gets to vote on the new Senate rule for the consideration of this bill in the Senate. And you then say, yep, House, we agree. We also will adopt exactly the same measure now that you have handed it to us. So beautifully written. So, if you want to turn the Senate into the House, one way to do it is to have the House Rules Committee write special rules for Senate consideration of individual bills and then accept them. I believe you just turned the Senate into the House. That can't be such a bad thing then, can it? You agreed to do it. Seems like a weird accusation to make at this stage of the game. All right, let's see. What other interesting things have happened that I had socked away in the Twitter files? Oh, yeah, I guess also on the same subject of filibuster reform, etc. I just wanted to react to the comment of Senator Thune, I guess at the same press conference, letting everybody know, well, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. When you start getting rid of the legislative filibuster, carve out or otherwise, it's gone. It's a whole new ball game around here. This would be disastrous for the United States Senate. It would be disastrous for Republicans momentarily in the United States Senate, but later great for them, so don't worry about it too much. By the way, the view on this show, you can put the genie back in the bottle. You actually it's the same thing. Actually, you use the same play. Just put them back in. That's all there is to it. You just don't want to run the play. That is to say, if you have a majority at your beck and call and you simply say, yeah, the rule or the interpretation of the rule at the moment is there is no such thing as the filibuster on this bill, genie's out of the bottle, right? Supposedly, in Thune's telling. Then Republicans take over in the Senate, let's say, hypothetically, and they say that is terrible. The genie is out of the bottle. Why not use your majority then to simply say our interpretation of it will be the opposite? When Democrats attempt to filibuster something, well, you could, if it's something you actually, well, you could run it both ways. If Democrats attempt to filibuster something that you want very badly, you can use the fact that that precedent exists to get it passed with majority vote, or you could take something that you don't particularly care about, but that incenses Democrats in some way, and have them filibuster it and just do the opposite and say, yeah, you know what? Although there are more than 50 votes for cloture on this, Rule 22, still on the books, says that you need 60 votes in order to invoke cloture, and that's our ruling. Cloture is not invoked. And then what did Democrats do? I mean, I guess they could appeal the ruling of the chair and say, no, it really only takes a majority. This would be very ironic to see this happen, because then a majority would vote either to table the appeal or just outright defeat the appeal and say our new interpretation is that it's back to 60 votes again. Poof, genie back in the bottle. One might even say that the ease with which you can jump back and forth between interpretations of the rule means that the genie was never in the bottle in the first place. Or as Kendall had responded to me, one of our good Twitter friends who follows along and listens to the show, Kendall Clark, saying, there's never been, there's neither a genie nor a bottle. And I don't know whether that was more of a reference to the Matrix, there is no spoon kind of thing, but yeah, that's another way of interpreting it. If there's, especially if there's no difference whether the genie is in or out, it's all just what you say. Maybe there's no bottle, maybe there's no genie. Pick the way you prefer to look at it, but you can make and unmake those rules at your, at your call. It's up to you. It's just something that you guys don't like to admit to very often, and I don't know why. I think it makes things fun. Anyway, let's see. Other things that circulated yesterday that I thought might be of some interest, but that for some reason didn't make it into the Pocket archive, but are on my Twitter archive instead. Oh, yes, right. Here we go. Back to the discussion of bottling farts, my original take on it. Oh, I forgot. I've forgotten that I had made some further comments on it. One being, I might as well make the same jokes that we made on Twitter yesterday. One, of course, the idea of, it's like people don't want to work anymore. Remember that line about that? We can't fill these jobs. You can fill these bottles, though. That's good news. Like people don't even want to work anymore. They're farting in jars for pay. Now, why would they show up, I guess, to work at a grocery store or at a hospital or a restaurant only to have people who they're serving yell at them about it, when you could instead fart in a bottle and charge them thousands of dollars and they would pay? I think I'd rather take that job too. All right, let's see. Oh yes, that's something we should probably pocket for later. Actually, should pocket that. One of these days, later on this week, we'll probably have a discussion of cryptocurrency pending that we'll have to talk about. Let's see. In collecting the various coronavirus stats nightly, as I do, I will note for the record, Hawaii, the last state in the union with lower than 10% of the population having been infected at this point. Still only 8.7% of Hawaiians, luckily, or those living in Hawaii anyway, to use the more sensitive term, maybe overly sensitive term. Anyway, good luck to you. I know things are changing rapidly for you there. Let's see. Other things of some interest. Oh, yes, this one struck me. We'll just throw this out there as something fun to think about along the way now that schools are reopening. I thought I might borrow the argument floated by more conservative, more moderate and conservative among those who have considered the idea of student loan forgiveness or erasure entirely of the student loans. I'll try the student loan argument about the moral hazard thing. Ready for this one? What if opening schools in the middle of this gigantic spike of Omicron, this super communicable variant, just so parents of, particularly of very young kids, can have, well, what amounts to the very youngest in the kindergarten, etc., let's say. What amounts to, okay, we'll dismiss it as free daycare. I know, that's very terribly unfair to teachers and what they do, and I don't actually I don't view school that way, but okay, many people do, right? So, okay, if we open the schools just so young kids can have free daycare and the parents can get back to work, isn't that unfair to the parents like me of high school kids who have already done the work of raising their kids and have only now gotten them to the point where they could, of course, stay home unsupervised if necessary. But I've put in that work. Why should that happen? Why do other people get to skirt around the rules and not have to put in that work? Just like the moral hazard of forgiving their student loans, which I, too, have paid off. Well, all right. Anyway, I didn't pay off nearly as much as you guys had to pay off. It's not something I actually believe. I wondered if that would just work, just to get us out of 2 days of school before it starts snowing again, and maybe keep the COVID out of my house for one more week. But if not, fine, so be it. Justice Putnam will take you further and make more sense than I did from here on in.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Sure, it was dopey and a throwaway thought. I only had 30 seconds left. Anyway, Justice Putnam takes you forward from here. He'll be covering with more gusto what was going on with the Hannity text that really does deserve some attention, and he'll give it to you. And on the rest of the menu, well, let's see. California lawmakers in the spotlight on gun companies. Stay tuned to find out.